It was a normal Saturday morning. I was standing in my garage, looking at the latest electricity bill sitting on my workbench. The coffee beside me had gone cold. The garage door was half open, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator running in the background. I looked at the number on that page twice, then a third time, because it didn't make sense. I hadn't changed my habits. I wasn't suddenly running new appliances. I was doing what most families do, trying to be careful, turning off lights, watching energy usage. And yet the bill kept climbing. That feeling is something millions of homeowners know very well. You're doing your part, but somehow you still feel like you're losing control. But what if the real problem isn't how much electricity you use? What if the bigger problem is that most homeowners have been taught to think about energy in only one way? Most people in this situation assume they are the problem. They think maybe they need to be more disciplined. Maybe they need better habits. Maybe they simply need to accept that electricity costs are something they have no control over. But after looking deeper into the issue, I started to see a different pattern. The problem wasn't just individual usage. The problem was dependency. For decades, most households have followed the same model. Power comes from a centralized grid. A monthly bill arrives. Prices change. And homeowners simply adjust. The assumption is that producing your own electricity is complicated, expensive, and only realistic for people with specialized knowledge or a large budget. And that assumption creates what I call the energy independence gap, a gap between what modern technology can potentially do and what ordinary homeowners believe is actually possible. For many people, the first alternative they consider is solar. And it makes sense. Solar panels are visible. They are familiar. They represent a cleaner way of producing energy. But many homeowners discover that installing a complete solar system can involve significant costs, planning, permits, and technical decisions. Others look at generators, but then they run into fuel costs, maintenance, noise, and the inconvenience of relying on another resource just to keep the lights on. The problem isn't that people aren't trying. The problem is that many people are only seeing a limited number of options. And that is where the conversation about home energy starts to change. Think about the first situation many homeowners face. You receive your electricity bill. You open the envelope expecting something similar to last month, but instead the number is higher. Maybe it's $30 more. Maybe it's $80 more. Maybe it's even more during extreme weather when heating or cooling becomes unavoidable. The frustrating part isn't only the money, it's the feeling that you have no real choice. You can reduce usage. You can change habits. You can spend time comparing plans. But at the end of the day, the bill still arrives from someone else. And the thought that goes through many people's minds is, maybe this is just how it works now. But what nobody talks about enough is that controlling consumption and controlling your source of energy are two completely different things. You can become extremely efficient and still remain completely dependent. And that distinction matters. The second situation happens when homeowners start looking for alternatives. They begin researching solar. They watch videos. They compare systems. They calculate potential savings. Then reality sets in. The equipment, the installation, the technical requirements, the long process. For some families, the numbers simply don't make sense. The idea sounds simple. Create your own power. But turning that idea into a practical system can feel overwhelming. And this is where many people stop. Not because they don't care. Not because they aren't interested. But because they assume independence requires a massive investment. They conclude, I guess this just isn't for someone like me. The third situation is what happens during a power outage. Most people rarely think about electricity when everything is working. The lights turn on. The refrigerator runs. The heating or cooling system does its job. Life continues. But when the grid goes down, even temporarily, the situation changes quickly. Suddenly, basic things become complicated. Keeping food cold becomes a concern. Comfort becomes a concern. Communication becomes a concern. And many homeowners discover something uncomfortable. They don't just depend on electricity. They depend on someone else deciding when that electricity comes back. That realization is what pushed many people to look for alternatives. Not because they want to become energy experts, but because they wanted more control over something that affects their daily lives. And here is where the pattern becomes clear. The rising bill, the expense of alternatives, the uncertainty during outages. What do all of these situations have in common? They all come from the same assumption, that the only way to have electricity is to purchase it from a traditional source. And once that assumption is questioned, a completely different path appears. Because throughout history, some of the most important technologies were not created by inventing something completely new. They came from looking at something familiar in a different way. That was the turning point in this story.